Chapter 18. Marya Dmitrievna, having found Sonia weeping in the corridor, made her confess everything, and intercepting the note to Natasha she read it and went into Natasha's room with it in her hand. "You shameless good-for-nothing," said she. "I won't hear a word." Pushing back Natasha, who looked at her with astonished but tearless eyes, she locked her in, and having given orders to the yard porter to admit the persons who would be coming that evening, but not to let them out again, and having told the footman to bring them up to her, she seated herself in the drawing-room to await the abductors. When Gabriel came to inform her that the men who had come had run away again, she rose frowning, and clasping her hands behind her paced through the rooms a long time considering what she should do. Toward midnight she went to Natasha's room fingering the key in her pocket. Sonia was sitting sobbing in the corridor. "Marya Dmitrievna, for God's sake let me into her," she pleaded, but Marya Dmitrievna unlocked the door and went in without giving her an answer. "Disgusting, abominable. In my house, horrid girl, hussy. I'm only sorry for her father," thought she, trying to restrain her wrath. "Hard as it may be, I'll tell them all to hold their tongues and will hide it from the count." She entered the room with resolute steps. Natasha lying on the sofa, her head hidden in her hands, and she did not stir. She was in just the same position in which Marya Dmitrievna had left her. "A nice girl." "Very nice," said Marya Dmitrievna. "Arranging meetings with lovers in my house. It's no use pretending, you listen when I speak to you." And Marya Dmitrievna touched her arm. "Listen when I speak. You've disgraced yourself like the lowest of hussies. I'd treat you differently, but I'm sorry for your father, so I will conceal it." Natasha did not change her position, but her whole body heaved with noiseless, convulsive sobs which choked her. Marya Dmitrievna glanced round at Sonia and seated herself on the sofa beside Natasha. "It's lucky for him that he escaped me, but I'll find him," she said in her rough voice. "Do you hear what I am saying or not?" she added. She put her large hand under Natasha's face and turned it toward her. Both Marya Dmitrievna and Sonia were amazed when they saw how Natasha looked. Her eyes were dry and glistening, her lips compressed, her cheeks sunken. "Let me be. What is it to me? I shall die," she muttered, wrenching herself from Marya Dmitrievna's hands with a vicious effort and sinking down again into her former position. "Natalie," said Marya Dmitrievna. "I wish for your good. Lie still, stay like that then, I won't touch you. But listen. I won't tell you how guilty you are. You know that yourself. But when your father comes back tomorrow, what am I to tell him?" Again Natasha's body shook with sobs. "Suppose he finds out, and your brother, and your betrothed?" "I have no betrothed, I have refused him," cried Natasha. "That's all the same," continued Marya Dmitrievna. "If they hear of this, will they let it pass? Your father, I know him, if he challenges him to a duel, will that be all right?" "Oh, let me be. Why have you interfered at all? Why? Why? Who asked you to?" shouted Natasha, raising herself on the sofa and looking malignantly at Marya Dmitrievna. "But what did you want?" cried Marya Dmitrievna, growing angry again. "Were you kept under lock and key? Who hindered his coming to the house? Why carry you off as if you were some gypsy singing girl? Well, if he had carried you off, do you think they wouldn't have found him? Your father, or brother, or your betrothed? And he's a scoundrel, a wretch, that's a fact. He is better than any of you," exclaimed Natasha getting up. "If you hadn't interfered. Oh, my God! What is it all? What is it? Sonia, why? Go away." And she burst into sobs with the despairing vehemence with which people bewail disasters they feel they have themselves occasioned. Marya Dmitrievna was to speak again, but Natasha cried out. "Go away! Go away! You all hate and despise me," and she threw herself back on the sofa. Marya Dmitrievna went on admonishing her for some time, enjoining on her that it must all be kept from her father and assuring her that nobody would know anything about it if only Natasha herself would undertake to forget it all and not let anyone see that something had happened. Natasha did not reply, nor did she sob any longer, but she grew cold and had a shivering fit. Marya Dmitrievna put a pillow under her head, covered her with 2 quilts, and herself brought her some lime flower water, but Natasha did not respond to her. "Well, let her sleep," said Marya Dmitrievna as she went out of the room supposing Natasha to be asleep. But Natasha was not asleep. With pale face and fixed wide-open eyes she looked straight before her. All that night she did not sleep or weep and did not speak to Sonia, who got up and went to her several times. Next day Count Rostov returned from his estate near Moscow in time for lunch as he had promised. He was in very good spirits. The affair with the purchaser was going on satisfactorily, and there was nothing to keep him any longer in Moscow, away from the countess whom he missed. Marya Dmitrievna met him and told him that Natasha had been very unwell the day before and that they had sent for the doctor, but that she was better now. Natasha had not left her room that morning. With compressed and parched lips and dry fixed eyes, she sat at the window, uneasily watching the people who drove past and hurriedly glancing round at anyone who entered the room. She was evidently expecting news of him and that he would come or would write to her. When the count came to see her she turned anxiously round at the sound of a man's footstep, and then her face resumed its cold and malevolent expression. She did not even get up to greet him. "What is the matter with you, my angel? Are you ill?" asked the count. After a moment's silence Natasha answered, "Yes, Illinois." In reply to the count's anxious inquiries as to why she was so dejected and whether anything had happened to her betrothed, she assured him that nothing had happened and asked him not to worry. Marya Dmitrievna confirmed Natasha's assurances that nothing had happened. From the pretense of illness, from his daughter's distress, and by the embarrassed faces of Sonia and Marya Dmitrievna, the count saw clearly that something had gone wrong during his absence, but it was so terrible for him to think that anything disgraceful had happened to his beloved daughter, and he so prized his own cheerful tranquility, that he avoided inquiries and tried to assure himself that nothing particularly had happened, and he was only dissatisfied that her indisposition delayed their return to the country. Chapter 19. From the day his wife arrived in Moscow Pierre had been intending to go away somewhere, so as not to be near her. Soon after the Rostovs came to Moscow the effect Natasha had on him made him hasten to carry out his intention. He went to Tver to see Joseph Alexeyevitch's widow, who had long since promised to hand over to him some papers of her deceased husband's. When he returned to Moscow Pierre was handed a letter from Marya Dmitrievna asking him to come and see her on a matter of great importance relating to Andrew Bolkonsky and his betrothed. Pierre had been avoiding Natasha because it seemed to him that his feeling for her was stronger than a married man's should be for his friend's fiancée. Yet some fate constantly threw them together. What can have happened? And what can they want with me, thought he as he dressed to go to Marya Dmitrievna's. If only Prince Andrew would hurry up and come and marry her, thought he on his way to the house. On the Tverskoy Boulevard a familiar voice called to him. "Pierre." "Been back long?" someone shouted. Pierre raised his head. In a sleigh drawn by 2 grey trotting horses that were bespattering the dashboard with snow, Anatole and his constant companion Macarin dashed past. Anatole was sitting upright in the classic pose of military dandies, the lower part of his face hidden by his beaver collar and his head slightly bent. His face was fresh and rosy, his white-plumed hat, tilted to one side, disclosed his curled and pomaded hair besprinkled with powdery snow. "Yes, indeed, that's a true sage," thought Pierre. "He sees nothing beyond the pleasure of the moment, nothing troubles him and so he is always cheerful, satisfied, and serene. What wouldn't I give to be like him," he thought enviously. In Marya Dmitrievna's anteroom the footman who helped him off with his fur coat said that the mistress asked him to come to her bedroom. When he opened the ballroom door Pierre saw Natasha sitting at the window, with a thin, pale, and spiteful face. She glanced round at him, frowned, and left the room with an expression of cold dignity. "What has happened?" asked Pierre, entering Marya Dmitrievna's room. "Fine doings," answered Dmitrievna. For 58 years have I lived in this world and never known anything so disgraceful. And having put him on his honor not to repeat anything she told him, Maria Dmitrievna informed him that Natasha had refused Prince Andrew without her parents' knowledge and that the cause of this was Anatole Kuragin, into whose society Pierre's wife had thrown her and with whom Natasha had tried to elope during her father's absence, in order to be married secretly. Pierre raised his shoulders and listened open-mouthed to what was told him, scarcely able to believe his own ears. That Prince Andrew's deeply loved affianced wife, the same Natasha Rostova who used to be so charming, should give up Bolkonsky for that fool Anatole who was already secretly married, as Pierre knew, and should be so in love with him as to agree to run away with him, was something Pierre could not conceive and could not imagine. He could not reconcile the charming impression he had of Natasha, whom he had known from a child, with this new conception of her baseness, folly, and cruelty. He thought of his wife. They are all alike, he said to himself, reflecting that he was not the only man unfortunate enough to be tied to a bad woman. But still he pitied Prince Andrew to the point of tears and sympathized with his wounded pride, and the more he pitied his friend the more did he think with contempt and even with disgust of that Natasha who had just passed him in the ballroom with such a look of cold dignity. He did not know that Natasha's soul was overflowing with despair, shame, and humiliation, and that it was not her fault that her face happened to assume an expression of calm dignity and severity. "But how get married?" said Pierre, in answer to Maria Dmitrievna. "He could not marry, he is married." "Things get worse from hour to hour," ejaculated Maria Dmitrievna. "A nice youth. What a scoundrel. And she's expecting him since yesterday. She must be told. Then at least she won't go on expecting him." After hearing the details of Anatole's marriage from Pierre, and giving vent to her anger against Anatole in words of abuse, Maria Dmitrievna told Pierre why she had sent for him. She was afraid that the Count or Bolkonsky, who might arrive at any moment, if they knew of this affair, which she hoped to hide from them, might challenge Anatole to a duel, and she therefore asked Pierre to tell his brother-in-law in her name to leave Moscow and not dare to let her set eyes on him again. Pierre, only now realizing the danger to the old Count, Nicholas, and Prince Andrew, promised to do as she wished. Having briefly and exactly explained her wishes to him, she let him go to the drawing-room. "Mind, the Count knows nothing. Behave as if you know nothing either," she said. "And I will go and tell her it is no use expecting him. And stay to dinner if you care to," she called after Pierre. Pierre met the old Count, who seemed nervous and upset. That morning Natasha had told him that she had rejected Bolkonsky. "Troubles, my dear fellow," he said to Pierre. "What troubles one has with these girls without their mother. I do so regret having come here. I will be frank with you. Have you heard she has broken off her engagement without consulting anybody? It's true this engagement never was much to my liking. Of course he is an excellent man, but still, with his father's disapproval they wouldn't have been happy, and Natasha won't lack suitors. Still, it has been going on so long, and to take such a step without father's or mother's consent. And now she's ill, and God knows what. It's hard, Count, hard to manage daughters in their mother's absence." Pierre saw that the Count was much upset and tried to change the subject, but the Count returned to his troubles. Sonia entered the room with an agitated face. "Natasha is not quite well, she's in her room and would like to see you. Maria Dmitrievna is with her and she too asks you to come." "Yes, you are a great friend of Bolkonsky's, no doubt she wants to send him a message," said the Count. Oh dear! Oh dear! How happy it all was! And clutching the spare grey locks on his temples the Count left the room. When Maria Dmitrievna told Natasha that Anatole was married, Natasha did not wish to believe it and insisted on having it confirmed by Pierre himself. Sonia told Pierre this as she led him along the corridor to Natasha's room. Natasha, pale and stern, was sitting beside Maria Dmitrievna, and her eyes, glittering feverishly, met Pierre with a questioning look the moment he entered. She did not smile or nod, but only gazed fixedly at him, and her look asked only one thing: was he a friend, or like the others an enemy in regard to Anatole? As for Pierre, he evidently did not exist for her. He knows all about it, said Maria Dmitrievna pointing to Pierre and addressing Natasha. Let him tell you whether I have told the truth. Natasha looked from one to the other as a hunted and wounded animal looks at the approaching dogs and sportsmen. Natalia Ilyinichna, Pierre began, dropping his eyes with a feeling of pity for her and loathing for the thing he had to do, whether it is true or not should make no difference to you, because. Then it is not true that he's married. Yes, it is true. Has he been married long? She asked. On your honor? Pierre gave his word of honor. Is he still here? She asked, quickly. Yes, I have just seen him. She was evidently unable to speak and made a sign with her hands that they should leave her alone. Chapter 20. Pierre did not stay for dinner, but left the room and went away at once. He drove through the town seeking Anatole Kuragin, at the thought of whom now the blood rushed to his heart and he felt a difficulty in breathing. He was not at the ice hills, nor at the gypsies, nor at Komanino's. Pierre drove to the club. In the club all was going on as usual. The members who were assembling for dinner were sitting about in groups, they greeted Pierre and spoke of the town news. The footman having greeted him, knowing his habits and his acquaintances, told him there was a place left for him in the small dining room and that Prince Michael Zakharich was in the library, but Paul Timofeevich had not yet arrived. One of Pierre's acquaintances, while they were talking about the weather, asked if he had heard of Kuragin's abduction of Rostova which was talked of in the town, and was it true? Pierre laughed and said it was nonsense for he had just come from the Rostovs. He asked everyone about Anatole. One man told him he had not come yet, and another that he was coming to dinner. Pierre felt it strange to see this calm, indifferent crowd of people unaware of what was going on in his soul. He paced through the ballroom, waited till everyone had come, and as Anatole had not turned up did not stay for dinner but drove home. Anatole, for whom Pierre was looking, dined that day with Dólokhov, consulting him as to how to remedy this unfortunate affair. It seemed to him essential to see Natasha. In the evening he drove to his sister's to discuss with her how to arrange a meeting. When Pierre returned home after vainly hunting all over Moscow, his valet informed him that Prince Anatole was with the Countess. The Countess' drawing-room was full of guests. Pierre, without greeting his wife whom he had not seen since his return, at that moment she was more repulsive to him than ever, entered the drawing-room and seeing Anatole went up to him. "Ah, Pierre," said the Countess going up to her husband. "You don't know what a plight our Anatole." She stopped, seeing in the forward thrust of her husband's head, in his glowing eyes and his resolute gait, the terrible indications of that rage and strength which she knew and had herself experienced after his duel with Dólokhov. "Where you are, there is vice and evil," said Pierre to his wife. "Anatole, come with me. I must speak to you," he added in French. Anatole glanced round at his sister and rose submissively, ready to follow Pierre. Pierre, taking him by the arm, pulled him toward himself and was leading him from the room. "If you allow yourself in my drawing-room," whispered Helene, but Pierre did not reply and went out of the room. Anatole followed him with his usual jaunty step but his face betrayed anxiety. Having entered his study Pierre closed the door and addressed Anatole without looking at him. "You promised Countess Rostova to marry her and were about to elope with her, is that so?" "Mon cher," answered Anatole, their whole conversation was in French, "I don't consider myself bound to answer questions put to me in that tone." Pierre's face, already pale, became distorted by fury. He seized Anatole by the collar of his uniform with his big hand and shook him from side to side till Anatole's face showed a sufficient degree of terror. "When I tell you that I must talk to you," repeated Pierre. "Come now, this is stupid." "What?" said Anatole, fingering a button of his collar that had been wrenched loose with a bit of the cloth. "You're a scoundrel and a blackguard, and I don't know what deprives me from the pleasure of smashing your head with this," said Pierre, expressing himself so artificially because he was talking French. He took a heavy paperweight and lifted it threateningly, but at once put it back in its place. "Did you promise to marry her?" I didn't think of it. I never promised, because..." Pierre interrupted him. Have you any letters of hers? Any letters, he said, moving toward Anatole. Anatole glanced at him and immediately thrust his hand into his pocket and drew out his pocketbook. Pierre took the letter Anatole handed him and, pushing aside a table that stood in his way, threw himself on the sofa. I shan't be violent, don't be afraid, said Pierre in answer to a frightened gesture of Anatole's. First, the letters, said he, as if repeating a lesson to himself. Secondly, he continued after a short pause, again rising and again pacing the room, tomorrow you must get out of Moscow. But how can I? Thirdly, Pierre continued without listening to him, you must never breathe a word of what has passed between you and Countess Rostova. I know I can't prevent your doing so, but if you have a spark of conscience, Pierre paced the room several times in silence. Anatole sat at a table frowning and biting his lips. After all, you must understand that besides your pleasure there is such a thing as other people's happiness and peace, and that you are ruining a whole life for the sake of amusing yourself. Amuse yourself with women like my wife, with them you are within your rights, for they know what you want of them. They are armed against you by the same experience of debauchery, but to promise a maid to marry her, to deceive, to kidnap. Don't you understand that it is as mean as beating an old man or a child? Pierre paused and looked at Anatole no longer with an angry but with a questioning look. I don't know about that, said Anatole, growing more confident as Pierre mastered his wrath. I don't know that and don't want to, he said, not looking at Pierre and with a slight tremor of his lower jaw, but you have used such words to me, mean and so on, which as a man of honor I can't allow anyone to use. Pierre glanced at him with amazement, unable to understand what he wanted. Though it was tête-à-tête, Anatole continued, still I can't. Is it satisfaction you want, said Pierre ironically. You could at least take back your words. What? If you want me to do as you wish, I take them back, said Pierre, and I ask you to forgive me. Pierre involuntarily glanced at the loose button. And if you require money for your journey? Anatole smiled. The expression of that base and cringing smile, which Pierre knew so well in his wife, revolted him. Oh, vile and heartless brood, he exclaimed, and left the room. Next day Anatole left for Petersburg.